When we think of serial killers, it's difficult to see them as human beings, especially when they have not only killed, but also mutilated and tortured their victims, both before and after death. Yet, when these killers give interviews, they often appear perfectly normal, making it hard to connect them to their heinous crimes. However, sometimes their true nature surfaces, revealing a chilling absence of remorse, and in this list, we look at killers who have given interviews and displayed a disturbing lack of empathy, along with disconcerting anger towards their interviewers. There are few serial killers as evil and sadistic as cobbler turned murderer Joseph Kallinger. He was born Joseph Lee Brenner in 1935 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. At the age of 4, he was adopted by Austrian immigrants Stephen and Anna Kallinger and given a new surname. His adoptive parents were abusive, and as an adult, he perpetuated that cycle of abuse with his own family. This ultimately led to his arrest for child abuse after his children reported him to the police. He was initially jailed but was later diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and subsequently released under the supervision of his family. By 1974, Kallinger complained of hearing voices from a floating head that he claimed followed him around. He also believed God was telling him to kill young boys and sever their penises. Acting on these voices, Kallinger enlisted his 13-year-old son, Michael, to help him torture and murder his first victim, a 9-year-old Puerto Rican boy. His next victim was his son, Joe Jr., who suffered for reporting his father to the police for abuse. Tragically, Jr. was later drowned in an abandoned building. On January 8, 1975, Kallinger and Michael gained entrance to a house in Leonia, New Jersey, by posing as salesmen. Once inside, they beat, robbed, and terrorized the 8 people inside. Kallinger went on to kill 21-year-old nurse Maria Fashing by stabbing her in the neck and back. The pair was soon apprehended after a blood-stained shirt left at the scene was traced back to the Kallinger household by a laundry mark. After his capture, Kallinger was diagnosed with paranoia and schizophrenia by psychiatrists. Despite this, the jury determined that he understood the difference between right and wrong, leading to his conviction for murder. He received a 40-year sentence in Pennsylvania for a series of robberies, followed by a life sentence in New Jersey for the murder of Maria Fashing. In jail, Kallinger's erratic behavior continued, and he repeatedly expressed his desire to kill every person on earth. He also slashed a fellow inmate's throat and poured lighter fluid on himself, set himself alight, and tried to fry an egg on his head. Eventually, he was moved to the Fairview State Hospital for the criminally insane. It was there that he gave this chilling interview to American journalist Geraldo Rivera.
You're patient, with a good ear, and you try to help people.
Yes.
When you're not trying to murder them.
Yes.
You murdered your own son?
Yes, I did.
Why did you do that?
He was a sacrifice. I was to murder 3 million people of planet Earth. And he was a sacrifice to see if I could murder one of my own. At the end of murdering all the people on Earth, I was going to murder my own family and then take my own life and become God.
What do you think of the death penalty?
I'm opposed to it.
The state has no right to take your life, but you can murder other people?
I don't think anyone has a right to take a life.
Except you?
When I'm under hallucination, I do.
These voices from God, these hallucinations, do you still experience them?
Yes, I do.
Often?
Often.
Do you ever feel violent?
Yes, I do.
What do you feel like doing?
Killing people.
You still feel like killing people?
Yes.
Describe the feeling that you get when you feel like killing people.
Well, last March 11th, I was hallucinating, and I took a razor blade and I cut a man's throat.
Here in the hospital?
Here in the hospital.
Do you think you'd murder me, Joe?
Yes.
That's gruesome, Joe. That's horrible.
Yes, it is.
And you don't blame me if I say I hope you never get out of this place.
I hope I never do either.
In the years following the interview, Kallinger expressed remorse and often refused to eat and attempted suicide. On March 26, 1996, he was put out of his misery when he died of a seizure, aged 59. As for his son, Michael, he was convicted as a juvenile and was placed on probation until his 25th birthday. He is now free and is believed to have changed his name. Aileen Wuornos was a female American serial killer who, whilst working as a prostitute on Florida's highways, shot dead and robbed 7 men. Her killing spree started around late November 1989 and earned her the nickname Damsel of Death. She would kill her victims, then steal their possessions, even their cars, and pawn the items using fake names. Wuornos always claimed she killed the men in self-defense after they attacked her. However, she later retracted that statement, and police believed she had killed men who'd either picked her up or had stopped to help her on the highway. On January the 27th, 1992, a jury found 35-year-old Wuornos guilty of first-degree murder and robbery, and she was sentenced to death, even though her sanity was questioned. Wuornos was only convicted of 6 murders. She was not charged with the 7th, Peter Seams, whose body has never been found, but he was almost certainly one of her victims. Her story was told in the 2003 movie Monster, where Wuornos was played by Charlize Theron, who won an Oscar for her portrayal. In 1992, Nick Broomfield released a documentary titled Aileen Wuornos, The Selling of a Serial, in which he chronicles his attempts to interview Wuornos. The film highlights the exploitation she faced from those around her and questions the fairness of her trial, considering the vested interests of the police. After Wuornos' conviction and death sentence, Broomfield made a second film that documented Wuornos' life on death row and the weeks leading up to her execution. The day before her execution, Broomfield conducts one final interview that clearly demonstrates Wuornos is far from sane and increasingly agitated and bitter towards the police. Eventually, she vents her anger towards Broomfield. Take a look.
You know, I already told you everything, so, you just go ahead and ask me questions, and if I want to answer them, I'll answer them, okay?
Okay. So I guess, I was just wondering how you're going to be, at 9:30 tomorrow morning. Are you prepared?
I'm prepared. I'm all right. I'm all right with it.
And how?
I'm all right with it, but like I said, remember, let them know that I know that the cops knew who I was. After Richard Mallory died, I left prints everywhere, and they covered it up and let me kill the rest of those guys to turn me into a serial killer. I know they did, because I was no professional serial killer or anything, murderer or whatever you want to call it, I wasn't professional at what I was doing.
Aileen,
I did some sloppy work, and I left
How
prints.
have you prepared yourself for tomorrow morning?
I'm all right with it.
Just before we came here, we met with your mother, Diane.
You met with my brother and Diane.
Your mother.
Oh, my mother, Diane, let me tell you something. She plopped me out of her belly, left me with my grandparents, and we never knew her. So tell that damn whore I could give a fuck if she even had me. You sabotaged my ass, society, and the cops, and the system. A raped woman got executed and was used for books and movies and shit. Ladder climbs, re-election, everything else. I got a big finger in all your faces. Thanks a lot. You're an inhumane bunch of fucking living bastards and bitches, and you're gonna get your asses nuked in the end. And pretty soon it's coming. 2019, a rock's supposed to hit you anyhow. You're all gonna get nuked. You don't take fucking human life like this and just sabotage and rip it apart like Jesus on the cross and say thanks a lot for all the fucking money I made off of you. We're gonna have to cut this interview, Nick. I'm not going to go into any more detail. I'm leaving. I'm glad. Thanks a lot, society, for railroading my ass. Okay, let's go. You dirty son of bitches. Took a raped woman and sent her to, well, you sent her to God, but you're gonna get your nuke someday soon.
Hey, Aileen. I'm sorry.
Thanks a lot.
On October the 9th, 2002, Wuornos was executed by lethal injection. She declined her last meal and opted for a cup of coffee instead. Her last words were, "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day, with Jesus." June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all, too. I'll be back. She died at 9:47 a.m. local time and became only the second woman in Florida to be executed since capital punishment was restored in 1976. Serial killer Arthur Shawcross murdered 11 women from 1988 to 1990 in upstate New York, earning him the nickname Genesee River Killer. Shawcross was born in Kittery, Maine, but moved with his family to Watertown, New York when he was young. He claimed that throughout his childhood he was sexually abused by his family, something they have always strenuously denied. As a young adult, he married and had a son, but the marriage had already broken down by the time he was drafted into the United States Army. Shawcross would go on and marry twice more, although all his marriages ended in divorce. After being discharged from the army, Shawcross began committing crimes and was eventually sentenced to 5 years in prison for arson and burglary. He was granted early release on October 1971 and returned to his hometown of Watertown, New York. On May 7, 1972, he assaulted and killed his first known victim, 10-year-old Jack Owen Blake. This was followed a few months later by the murder of 8-year-old Karen Ann Hill. Shawcross was quickly arrested, but remarkably was allowed to plead guilty to a lesser charge of first-degree manslaughter for both deaths, despite having sexually assaulted both children. He was sentenced to an indeterminate term with a maximum of 25 years at Attica Correctional Facility. However, inexplicably, Shawcross only served 14 years in prison before being released in April 1987. It did not take long for Shawcross to return to his murderous ways, and he went on to kill 12 more women. Most, but not all, were prostitutes. He viciously attacked all the women before strangling them and mutilating their bodies. Many of his victims were dumped in the Genesee River. Shawcross later admitted to eating some of the women's genitals. On January 2nd, 1990, a helicopter observed what seemed to be a naked female body lying on the ice surface of a river near a bridge in the forest. 2 days later, police arrested Shawcross, who had been standing by his car close to where the woman's body was discovered. The body was that of missing prostitute June Cicero. She had been mutilated post-mortem, as well as sawn practically in half. It was speculated Shawcross had returned to the scene of the crime to relive the pleasure of the attack. Initially he was uncooperative, but later admitted to most of the murders, giving detailed excuses about why he had been forced to kill each one. He even admitted to the killing of 2 undiscovered victims, leading investigators to their bodies. His formal confession was nearly 80 pages long. After a jury found Shawcross to be sane, he was sentenced to 250 years in prison, with an additional life sentence for murder in Wayne County. He was convicted of 11 murders, while the 12th case was inconclusive but is almost certainly attributed to him. Shawcross was held at the Sullivan Correctional Facility in New York State. From there, he gave this disturbing interview, sharing candid details of his heinous crimes, whilst seemingly reveling in his notoriety.
I get a lot of college students, college professors, all kinds of people from all walks of life.
Do you see yourself as something of a celebrity here?
Of course.
Do you enjoy the attention?
Sometimes. Sometimes it gets to be a hassle. One of the women who stopped in the car told me one of the women I took out is HIV positive. I didn't know which one of them were, so I started killing them. While I was doing it, I took the vagina of 3 and ate it.
I suppose it's because some people might say, well, isn't that just an excuse to justify killing?
You believe what you want to believe. And there's always a bad man in me. I'm trying to keep him there. I don't want to hurt nobody else.
Just a final question, Arthur. I mean, why won't you talk about the 2 young
Stop. It's over. Disconnect.
Is it not because? Is it because you're ashamed of it?
It's disconnect. This is over.
Okay. Arthur, thank you very much for your time.
Shawcross spent the rest of his life in prison and died on November 10th, 2008, of a heart attack. Richard Ramirez was born February 29th, 1960, in El Paso, Texas. His horrific crimes stemmed directly from his troubled childhood. He endured severe physical abuse from his father, which left him with brain damage. Additionally, he began using drugs at the age of 10 and was exposed to murder early in life when he witnessed his cousin kill his wife. After dropping out of school, Ramirez moved to Los Angeles. He was already hooked on cocaine and committed burglaries to support his habit. On April 10, 1984, Ramirez claimed his first victim, a 9-year-old girl named Mei Lung, although the killing was not linked to him until 2009, when his DNA was matched to a sample obtained at the crime scene. On March 17, 1985, he stabbed and assaulted a 79-year-old widow after breaking into her home. Then, after waiting 9 months, he attacked Maria Hernandez, who managed to escape. However, he then killed her roommate, 34-year-old Daily Okazaki. On the same day, he also shot and killed Tsai Lian Yu. The double murder prompted a media frenzy, leading to Ramirez being dubbed the Valley Intruder by the press. Just 10 days later, Ramirez murdered 64-year-old Vincent Zazara and his 44-year-old wife, Maxine, using an attack style that would become a pattern for the killer. Vincent was first shot, then his wife was brutally assaulted and stabbed to death, before having her eyes gouged out. In May 1985, Ramirez repeated his attack pattern on William and Lynn Doi. Over the next few months, he claimed another dozen victims in a frenzy of burglary, assault, and brutal violence, complete with satanic rituals. Some of his surviving victims aided with descriptions of Ramirez, and with the police on his tail, Richard left LA and travelled to San Francisco, where he took 2 more victims, Peter and Barbara Pan. His unmistakable MO, complete with satanic symbolism, earned him a new name, the Night Stalker. Ramirez killed once more before being apprehended on August 31st, 1985, after residents attacked him after he tried to steal 2 cars. On August 24, 1985, in the Los Angeles area, Ramirez was spotted outside a Mission Viejo home, where he unwittingly left a footprint before the witness took note of his car and license plate. Later, after Ramirez raped another woman at her home and shot her fiancé, the victim provided a detailed description of her assailant, who had forced her to swear her love for Satan. On September 20th, 1989, the jury finally returned a unanimous guilty verdict on 43 charges, including 13 counts of murder, 5 counts of attempted murder, 11 sexual assault charges, and 14 burglary charges. Ramirez was sentenced to death by gas chamber. As he left the courtroom, he said, "Hey, big deal. Death always comes with the territory. I'll see you in Disneyland." In a rare interview with Mike Watkis in 1993, Ramirez comes across as chilling and unremorseful for the crimes he has committed. Take a look.
Did you kill 13 people?
It would be improper for me to comment because of my appeals. Serial killers do on a small scale what governments do on a large one. They are a product of the times, and these are bloodthirsty times.
Do you have emotions, Richard?
No comment.
Do you admit to being evil, Richard?
We are all evil in some form or another. Yes, I am evil.
After nearly 24 years on death row at San Quentin Prison in California, Ramirez died on June 7th, 2013. Not in the gas chamber, but from complications related to B-cell lymphoma. He was 53 years old. Tommy Lynn Sells was an American serial killer known as the Coast to Coast Killer because he claimed to have committed murders throughout the United States. Unlike others on his list, he was convicted of only one murder. However, he admitted to and likely killed many more. Sells was born in Oakland, California on June 28, 1964. He was an unwanted and unloved child, passed around the family to look after, and he claims he was sexually abused as a child. At the age of 10, Sells started using narcotics, and by the age of 13, he had been completely abandoned by his family due to his inappropriate behaviour towards his mother and grandmother. From that point on, he led a nomadic life, travelling across the United States by train hopping and hitchhiking. Along the way, he committed various crimes and took short-term jobs. He drank heavily and abused drugs, and while imprisoned for a series of petty crimes, he was diagnosed with a personality disorder and psychosis. Despite his diagnosis, he was released without any follow-up treatment, and this lack of care ultimately led him killing at least 22 men, women, and children between 1979 and 1999. In a particularly gruesome attack on November 17, 1987, Sells murdered 4 members of the Dardine family after being picked by Keith Dardine whilst hitchhiking. Keith invited Sells back to his house. When they arrived, Sells shot Keith twice in the head. He then bludgeoned to death Keith's 3-year-old son and attacked his wife, Elaine, who was heavily pregnant. The trauma of the beating caused her to go into labour, and she gave birth to her daughter. But Sells, in a cold-blooded and callous move, beat the newborn to death. Sells was finally apprehended after he sexually assaulted, stabbed, and killed 13-year-old Aileen Harris before slitting the throat of a 10-year-old Crystal Searles, who thankfully survived. A sketch of the attacker was made from her description, and he was quickly identified. Sells was convicted of the murder of Aileen Harris and sentenced to death. However, he described in detail how many other people he had killed, confessing to over 70 murders, although it is believed this is exaggerated and the true total is around 22. Sells was housed on death row in Texas, and in 2010, Martin Bashir went to interview him for an ABC News mini-documentary titled Tommy Lynn Sells, The Mind of a Psychopath. The interview is chilling. Take a look.
I like to watch the eyes fade, the pupil fade. It's just like setting their soul free. I think every time I killed that guy that molested me all them years. I seen that in my mind over and over. I suffer more here than I'll ever suffer in that grave. I have to live with it every day now. When they kill me, at least I'll be free then.
On April 3rd, 2014, Sal's death sentence was carried out at the Texas State Penitentiary in Huntsville. When asked if he would like to make a final statement, he replied, no. As a lethal dose of pentobarbital was administered, he took a few deep breaths, closed his eyes, and began to snore. Less than a minute later, he stopped moving. 13 minutes later, at 6:27 p.m., he was pronounced dead.